like, I think we're still kind of like figuring out how to do all of this. So California is reopening. But more than anything, people are ready to re-engage. I think that has become clear with the clients that I've worked with, the organizations that I'm following. And so that has been clear, like people are ready to re-engage in a different way, and we're much more open to it. So let's get started. So next. You know me, both of you have participated in the last workshop, so I won't go into that. And next slide. And then you've already asked a burning question or shared a thought. So thank you so much for doing that. Today we're gonna reflect on and anticipate possible needs and barriers for engaging your audiences. And here's the thing: I don't have to repeat the barriers that you've had, right? Like we basically have come a long way since the last year, and you've learned what to do, or what's working or what's not working for you in the last year. And so hopefully with this information that I'm giving you, you'll be able to gain some new ideas that you can apply within the next week or two, or the next month, or you can bring back to your team. Okay, next. I just want to recap that the recipe for effective communications plan is to be clear, goal-oriented, and consistent. Those three things are extremely important when you're doing any kinds of communication strategies and any kind of communications activities. Otherwise, they're not likely to work. They're not going to be effective. Next. You always begin with the end in mind. And Leah had touched on a great point. Some organizations just have a mission, right? And hopefully that mission is clear enough that you are able to pull some feelings from it, that you're able to instill some feelings and get some values from it, and also are able to share that with other people. Like you're comfortable enough with it that you're able to share that with other people. Next. Again, we always come back to those things so that you have integrity within your communication strategy. Next. Also, some things have changed for organizations, so we want to acknowledge that. Number one, we're relying heavily on digital right now, and like I mentioned before, we are not likely to, like this is not likely to stop. We are going to continue relying more and more on digital. So organizations are going to have to figure out what they want to do with digital. It's not whether or not they want to use digital. At this point, you have to use it. Like there's no other option. You innovate or die. That has become way too real. Before, it was like you can continue doing the same things over and over, but now you almost, because our consumers of information are getting bombarded with so much information, so many invitations, so many calls to action. You have to figure out a way to connect with your audience in a way that is innovative for you. It doesn't mean, use the same tactics as the large organizations or companies that have a big budget. It just means like innovate for your organization. Your audience will consume most of their services digitally, and it is not enough to provide a great service. It needs to be marketed well. So you can have the best services and the most amazing resource available to community, but if you don't market it well, it's not gonna get to the end user. And so one great example of this is scholarships. And so if your organization offers basic, and scholarships are free money, right? If your organization doesn't market the scholarships well, they're going to go to waste. And so much of this money, and I actually worked in education, and I would see scholarships basically being returned to donors because they would not be able to be given out. Like students would not apply, and it was our fault because we weren't marketing them well. Okay, so whenever we have it's not just enough to have a really great service, you have to market it well. Next. Actually, before I go on, does anybody have any questions about what I mentioned, or any thoughts or any examples of anything that I've just mentioned? Okay, that's okay. We can keep going. So your audiences might be different now. And the reason I mention that is because, you know, the stories that I keep hearing about, like, okay, how do we re-engage the audiences that want to come back to us? Or how do we reach new audiences? Here's the thing. It is actually very likely that your audience might be different now. I think not only has a life-changing experience happened in the last year for many people, but also we're spending more time on the internet, right? We're spending more time at home. And so all of these life-changing experiences and day-changing experiences have changed people, but also the way that we communicate with each other has changed. So I would say that if you want to re-engage your audiences, you have to do, and if you can click next, Susie, you have to evaluate your beneficiaries and audiences. Okay, so it is very likely that they have changed, but it's possible that they haven't. So the first activity you want to do is actually evaluate who your current audiences are. And a tool for that is the next page. And the tool for that is a business model. Well, this is a business model canvas for nonprofit organizations. So if you do a Google search for business model canvas, a lot of information is going to come up. This tool, which you are going to have access to, is actually very specific to nonprofit organizations. Now, one of the things you want to do is to make sure that you, number one, figure out what your beneficiary segments are. And these are the people who are receiving your services, right? We might find that you not only have the ones that you used to serve, but you have additional ones. You might also find that your donors are actually different as well, right? It might be the same, if part of them might be the same donors that you used to have before, but now you might actually have an opportunity to open up the opportunity to support your beneficiaries and your organization from other people that you didn't have access to before. Okay. And now you want to evaluate that before you create any marketing strategy or any communication strategy, because you want to take advantage of the opportunity to reach out to new audiences and use the tools that or the channels. So meaning like the communications channels, whether it's email, text, social media, in order for you to be able to craft the best message possible to be able to reach them. And so it's kind of like knowing that you now have access to different buckets of people. It sounds weird, but like buckets of people, but not knowing who they are. So if you take some time to kind of think about like who's coming to us now, who's calling or emailing us about our organization services, right? Are they the same people or are they different? Are there other communities that need our help? And are they the same or different than the ones that we're serving now? So it's an investment in time to start with this piece. I would say that it's going to be one of the best activities that you can do. And you have access to one-on-one consulting with me. So I'll do a little bit of a commercial if that's okay, Susie, to be able to say, you have access to one-on-one with me. So if you want to draft something or you want to go through this exercise, that we can do this together. Okay. We can do a Zoom call or we can do a phone call, whatever you feel comfortable. And I can help you figure out if you have different audiences now. Okay. Next. So how do we re-engage our audiences? Next slide, please. Basically, the overarching goal is to say, let's move forward together. Okay. We are in this time and space together. We have experienced a lot. And so like, how do we move forward? And this is especially if you're one, like Arturo mentioned, like reaching to new audiences, or if you want to re-engage them, you want to be able to offer something that is not necessarily something they had before. And people now have the energy to be able to say, okay, like what is next, right? So let's move forward together is the overarching theme and what your approach should be. So next, number one, you want to acknowledge what has happened. especially if you haven't been as proactive in sharing with your audiences. So let's say your organization went into a little bit of a hiatus when this situation happened, which is understandable because nobody knew what was happening, right? It's kind of like this moment of disorientation. If I'm assuming that in some organizations that happen and to a certain level. And so you want to acknowledge what has happened. And it doesn't mean like you putting your worst foot forward, but just saying like, hey, and one of the ways could be like, we have been stay and so one of the things that I want to mention actually is that you want to be genuine about this, and you might want to get a little bit vulnerable, but definitely do not disclose stuff that HR wouldn't allow you to disclose. And also just be mindful of the way that you're gonna sound. And I have an example on the next slide. And this is from, I acknowledge that it's from a business, but I think it's extremely important to think about your messaging, and whoever's receiving it as your audience and your customers, because they're either buying your message or they're not, right? And so first I want to share this quote from Brené Brown. And it's saying, staying vulnerable is a risk we have to take if we want to experience connection. And at the end of the day, any communications activity is for connection. That is the goal, right? For us to connect and then take action. And so this business, it's a tiny sister business, shared this message recently, which was like, I think it was yesterday, a couple of days ago. And she's saying, we would like to apologize for not being as active as usual. We're currently out of town and dealing with personal stuff. We want to inform you all that since you guys are the ones keeping us moving and staying positive, we hope you guys understand and continue to stay here with us. So this is very vulnerable. She didn't disclose what the family issue is. She didn't disclose any of that. And it sounds like somebody saying, hey, I'm sorry that we haven't been as attentive, or I'm sorry that it's apologetic, but it's not overly apologetic. I thought this was a very moving message, and any organization could, and I'm not saying you have to apologize for not being engaged, but I think there's a level of like, hey, we've been trying to figure this out. I think it's important for you to know that we're thinking of you, and we want to make it make a return the best that we can. Okay, so that would be one approach. Another approach could be like, it could be also in a very positive way, like just saying, we are, we've been planning, our return. We have been, supporting our team. Like there's just so many, and of course it has to be genuine. So I wouldn't say like, don't make the stuff up. And of course, like you probably weren't even thinking of that, but it has to be genuine, right? Because your community is going to know whether or not you're coming from a genuine place, or a place of authenticity. And so we also want to apologize to all of our customers whose orders got delayed. So there was an issue there. I know that for many organizations, like being able to get all of their team members online has been a challenge, or even just like getting the phones answered, right, is a challenge. Maybe there's delays in providing the services. Like it's totally fine to say to apologize for that if you feel like you need to. Okay, but there's no need necessarily to apologize. I think the key here is more than anything to be vulnerable. Like this has been a hard time for all of us, but we're here, and we're here to serve you. Any questions or concerns or any ideas that pop up for you? Yes, Susie.
I'm just going to jump in. When you are talking about acknowledging what just happened, I was wondering, is it more about like what's been happening to the organization, or what's been happening to maybe the audience, or do you look for places where it's the same and share that?
So I would say a little bit of both. I think it depends on the organization. But I would say that because you want to reconnect with your audience, you want to talk about yourself, what's been happening within the organization, right? Because I think there's going to be this certain common knowledge about what's been happening in the world, and we want to acknowledge that. But I think also because we're a little bit over a year into the pandemic, it's important for you as as a representative of an organization to be a little bit authentic, about what's been going on with the organization, without disclosing, things that you could get into trouble about from HR, right? Like, you want to be mindful of the crafting that message, but also, like, I think there's a level of vulnerability that will bring community members back, right? And we'll say, okay, like, it's totally okay, and we get it, right? Like, we've all been going through it. Yeah, so I would say it's about the organization and the team more than anything. Okay. Okay, have a fun or uplifting return theme or mantra. So I would say a year ago, I would have never suggested this, right? Like, it was totally like out of, like, tone deaf. I know, some celebrities got into trouble for wanting to be like optimistic and all of that. And I think it's been a year. I think people and get a feel for what your community's doing, right? But you definitely, if you're planning a return and re-engagement, and if it's appropriate, definitely have a fun or uplifting return theme or mantra. We're stronger than ever, right? Like, we're coming back stronger than ever. We're here to stay. Like, join us in this in this activity that we're doing. And so I have some examples of that, because this might be something that you might have some people within your organization resisting to it. And I think you have to be mindful, and you also has to come as authentic as it can be. But if you really want to engage people and you want to move forward, you want to have some sort of uplifting return message, right? And it doesn't mean that you were gone forever, you were gone and nobody heard from you, but that might be the case for some organizations. And some examples of that, if you want to click next, Susie, is the state of California, right? Like, and I thought this was so interesting. I think this was posted, I want to say yesterday or the day before. If you don't like the road you're walking, start paving a new one, said Dolly Parton. I thought that was cute and interesting, right? Like, you don't like the way your communication strategy is going, let's try a new one, right? And right now it would be appropriate to have a message like the state of California roars back, right? Like, it's on theme. It's a little cheesy, but it's also, not totally inappropriate. It's actually okay. Like, we're back, like, we're figuring out how to get things back on track. It doesn't say, like, it's not the kind of message that is going to be too positive that it's tone deaf, but it's enough to say, okay, let's come together and, like, let's work together to move forward. I want to hear your thoughts about this specifically. What are some thoughts that come to mind? And it's totally okay if you're like, I totally disagree with this. I think it's always good to get feedback on that as well.
Okay. Kind of, if I could.
Yeah, go ahead, Leah.
So I like this. I like the fact that there's a positive message. When you said tone deaf, it kind of made me think, being like, maybe perhaps some of my communications are tone deaf if I'm, just naturally kind of thinking of, as a kin keeper, how are the employees doing? How are they feeling? Are they having problems with their service? So those questions came up. And I'm thinking my communications are usually positive, but maybe I'm being a bit tone deaf. So I'm just wondering, being in charge of marketing and communications, how do I connect with other staff who are under the wing of their development director? Is that something I would go to their development director and see, hey, how are I'm kind of confused on how to know if you're tone deaf or not. Like, because sometimes I feel like people are really struggling, but the services are there, the numbers are coming up. We're having disaster case management programs roll out. But I really want to I don't know if I'm speaking for Catholic Charities Organization in Monterey when I'm positive, we're there for you. More like an advertisement rather than a nonprofit place.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So I think if we imagine organizations as people, which is really weird, so but just, you know, get, if we imagine them as they're shown on any communications that we offer, you want to have a variety of messages. They all have to be within message, but you want to have a variety. I think one way to stay away from being tone deaf is having stories, like sharing stories that are very balanced, right? Like, yes, this family is struggling, but look, we were able to give them access to all of this, right? And you can say, you know, we acknowledge that we're not fixing the issue, like we're not fixing the entire problem, but for the next, you know, month, they're not going to have to worry about the rent, right? Like that's a really vulnerable and true and balanced story, and it's the truth, right? I think that that's very important. I for about a year I worked for Sacred Heart Community Service Agency, or Sacred Heart Community Service, and one of the great things I learned from the executive director, he was always it's interesting because like he himself is that the way that I would hear him talk about the work that we did, it was never enough, right? And I mean, we were serving and they continue to serve people who are living in poverty and chronic poverty in one of the richest cities in the world. And so it was interesting to see, it's interesting to see the communications and how balanced they are. So I would follow them on social media and you'll see, I mean, they're providing essential services, people who are literally like chronically in living in poverty, but a lot of their communication is balanced and they show these stories, like it's very story based, and a good story will have a little bit of both, right? A good story is not just like happy, happy, happy. It's really, you know, it'll have like the tough moments because it'll help you feel a range of emotions. So I would say definitely have a little bit more balance. Like don't just be positive all the time, right? Like I would say definitely have a little bit of balance and try to have a range of emotion in your messaging. I would say stories are, especially client stories, where you could get, you know, quotes, staff stories as well. And I think the key in that and getting really great stories are actually coming from, it'll come from the kind of questions you ask, right? And so like, what was the biggest challenge you faced as an employee of our organization in the last year, right? What are you really grateful for, you know, with regard to your work here, right?
Yes.
I think in having really great questions is having really great questions that are going to help you get great answers that are going to be help you deliver a balanced message.
Yes.
Yeah, but I would say definitely keep it positive. Another thing that I've noticed is that when you show like when you're coming from a space of gratitude, you also, you know, whether you're grateful to your donors, whether you're grateful to your clients, right, for continuing to believe in you, you're gonna get a ripple effect in your messaging as well. Right. And I think that's also another great strategy to use when you're trying to balance out your messaging,
Yes.
you know, showing like coming from a place of gratitude.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Next slide. Okay. The key is to offer them something they didn't have before. Right. And I think there's a lot of things that were taken away from us and also given, right, in the last year. And the key is to offer them something they didn't have before, like a membership, right? Like, and so in thinking about your program delivery, like I said earlier, we don't just want to do the same thing. We don't want to do the same thing just online, right? Like if you didn't have a membership before, like, can you offer them to be a part of something that is now a membership and benefits that come with that membership, right? If you, I know that one of the organizations that I watched the interview for, they said that they had been thinking since 2019, 2018 to offer an online course in arts. And so they had been thinking about it. They had been thinking about it and never got around to it. And right now, because they had to do it, they actually, it's one of the biggest revenue sources for them, right? And now they're reaching a super broad audience. And it's a really great time to be innovative within your organization, right? Like how do you start offering something you didn't have before, and also engage your community in coming up with what you're going to offer. I know that I think somebody had mentioned that they were offering an online, a concert that was accessible online, right? And so there's so many ways that you can start innovating. And here's the thing, if there was ever a good time to try something new, it is now, because you basically have no other option. Like I think that's one of the pieces, but also there's so much more room to mess up, right? Like I think audiences are very, very forgiving, and we're all trying to figure out how we're going to continue to engage in a safe way. And so it'll be important for us to do that. Okay, next slide. So when we're thinking about engaging our audiences, maybe we work for an organization or we do the kind of work that we think it's not very visually appealing, or maybe it's not as visually interesting as we might want it to be. But there's always a way that we can innovate, and there's always something we can offer our audiences. So, a citywide cleanup, it isn't necessarily the most interesting thing, but it could be something we didn't have before, right? And so and I love this message because there's nothing really elaborate about it, right? Because oftentimes we think, oh, I'm not going to use social media because I don't know how to use it. Well, here's the thing, it doesn't have to be elaborate, especially if you're just engaging your audiences, right? You might have 5 people who are looking at your messages, which is fine, but then you get some feedback to see how many people actually get drawn to your message and click. So this message is specifically like, don't forget to check your June utility bill for your voucher, right? And then you're obviously following this up with an email, or you're obviously following this up with snail mail, or however else you engage your audiences. This is just like a simple way to start reaching out and getting yourself or your team comfortable with engaging with social. Next. Okay. I thought this was also kind of interesting. A city council meeting. I mean, they're not the most interesting when meetings to go to, right? I mean, there might be interesting. What I meant to say was fun, right? But you can show that your organization is, turning the leaf to a positive environment and messaging by having a timer, right? For an important meeting. And who knows, you might get a couple of people showing up to the meeting or engaging in your stories because of this. Okay, so there's different ways in which you can do that. And right now I'm just talking about social media, but this applies to every channel that you use. Every channel that you use needs to have a component of being interesting or fun. Just because we're at this point where we do want to engage audiences, and other organizations and other businesses, that information that is being consumed by audiences is still being it's turning the leaf as well. So you want to get on that. Okay, next slide. I'm not sure if you let me ask this. Are your organizations thinking about having outdoor events now that there has been some new guidance from the CDC? Is that something that is going to be happening, or you're having conversation about it?
Yeah,
Arturo?
it's definitely in our radar. I think we are gonna, some of our sites have been now in person, but we are definitely continuing to be hybrid.
Okay. Okay. Leah, are you planning to have? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you. There are some events planned. They're in the fall. There's still some time away, but yes, there are some tentative dates on the calendar for
Okay.
some of our programs to have outdoor events.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is gonna start happening more and more, right? And so you want to be clear on what the rules of engagement are. I know that I keep talking about how you have to be clear with your message. So you want to be clear, like, what does it mean for your organization to have this, and what are you expecting your participants to do? And it's, it's important for you to say, we're gonna wear masks. This is how you wear the mask, or we're gonna have, X, Y, and Z available, whether it's like masks if you don't have one, or we're gonna have a hand washing station, and also offer alternatives. I think even though more people are feeling comfortable going to in-person events, you can also offer an alternative, right? For your community that wants to engage, but isn't necessarily comfortable going to an outdoor event. And that could be something like an interactive, visit to the event. Like, for example, some of my favorite things to do in the new city that I live in is actually going to the small business pop-ups. And so they're very clear about, like, you're expected to wear a mask, don't bring your pets, or bring your pets, or whatever. But also I love looking at the organized, like when I can't go, or where some of the pop-ups in the county that I live in, there are some groups that are not as strict with mask wearing, even in outdoors spaces. And sometimes I decide I'm not going to go, and I love still engaging, but virtually, right? So then I follow their story. So if you're going to have an outdoor event, some people might still be thinking about whether or not to go, right? And even if you have clear rules of engagement, so you might want to give them an opportunity to see what it's like at your first event, to be a part of it without having to be there. And that means making the use of Instagram stories and Facebook stories, or live streaming. Okay. I would encourage you to do that as you're delivering, your message about what this new way of engaging is going to be, to give people an alternative. Okay. Any questions or concerns about this, or any thoughts that you have about outdoor events, or communicating what you should be communicating? Okay, next slide. Okay, another piece of or another type of story that you want to share in your communications, whether it's your newsletter, like I said, even in a text message, if you have that capability within your organization, is highlight what you missed and what you want to get back. Right? A lot of the, and you could do a brainstorm of this, like, what do you miss about life before the pandemic, right? Like, do you miss those conversations with your community, right? And of course, there's a part of us that, like, love to reminisce about, for me, what it's like to be in a classroom full of students, right? And having, like poster board, and in an actual audience, right? And so for me, reminiscing on that and thinking about that, it actually brings me nostalgia, but also like joy, right? So you can actually do that, right? Like, we want to be able to get back, and so let's continue staying connected, right? You want to do that. You want to be able to have help people remember you as the organization that you were and the services that you offered. And I think that gives a little bit of especially if you're trying to reach your former audiences, this gives them a little bit of a way to connect with you. Okay, next. Highlight your people and their commitment to your cause. You want to, I think staff members, especially of nonprofits, have been, I think having worked with nonprofits, people who work in nonprofits work really, really hard, right? I think that, you're not working in a nonprofit for the money. It's really just your commitment to the cause, right? And how it connects you to other people. And so highlighting your people and their commitment is one way in which you can reach new audiences. You can also reconnect with your previous audiences, and also start, if you lost a few people during the pandemic, they might have gone to work with other organizations, maybe they stopped working altogether, or positions were closed. I mean, a lot happened, a lot of shifting happened. And so you also want to be mindful of what volunteers and what future staff members you attract, right? And so if that is one of your audiences, you want to start highlighting the people in your organization and the people you want, and that'll, kind of give other people an idea of what kind of community is within the organization. And I think this is extremely important. And like I mentioned to Leah, having a balanced story, right? Like this person works really, really hard, and they're, also, homeschooling 3 kids. Like that is, you're showing both of those stories. And then, also thinking about how the pandemic has impacted your staff, and also, what we're grateful for is important. So this, and I think Arturo, for your particular case, this might be a good opportunity for you to highlight who the staff member or the team that's going to be working with the new community. Like who's coming to our community, who is going to be serving us, who's going to be teaching the classes or offering the services, right? And sharing that story, I think also attracts, helps people decide whether or not they want to be a part of it. Does this make sense? Can you think, Leah, can you think of one person? Yeah, okay, good. Arturo, is this something that you think you can do for your organization as you're entering this new community?
Yeah, actually, that definitely sounds appealing. I think in addition to that, one thing I would like to do too is kind of email it to some of the partners that are working there. Hopefully we could team up some of the individuals that may know of a work and might make it easier for us to settle in with their collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be, I mean, it's like you giving an introduction to that organization. I mean, even if it's digital or via an email, you want to, one of the things that I mentioned at the last workshop, which what I want to reiterate here, is that you want to have digital assets, right? Like your picture, and a picture of your staff members that you can share comfortably on social media, that you can share on your newsletter, that you can use in all of this collateral, because I think it's important for your organization's brand to have all of, to have a face, right? And each of you are a face for your organization. So I think that's extremely important. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy or expensive. Most of our phones have enough capability for us to be able to get some digital assets. Most people's phones have, there, and you can give them instruction on how to take a good picture. There might be some concerns and barriers to this. I know that when I was working on a newsletter for an organization, I just couldn't get a couple of the staff members to take a picture. Like it was just so hard. Like they really did not want to have a picture taken, which is okay. I think it's just giving people really great instructions, right? And deadlines and all of that. But But even just having a really good one is going to make a difference in how you connect with other organizations and community that you want to serve. Okay, next. The other thing that you can do with your team members is actually having them share a little bit of what they do outside of work that maybe relates to work, right? Like, so in this case, NELCAB actually highlighted their staff member, Natalia, who was on a podcast. And so as you're meeting with your team and they're sharing, oh, well, I did this or I did that, maybe you can start building a culture of like sharing even the things that they do outside of the organization that sometimes may or may not be a little bit more interesting at that moment than what they're doing, right? And so within the organization, but it's also related. It gives this this way for you to relate for your audiences to relate more to your staff, right? And I thought this was interesting. So this is another way in which you can create content for your communications. And next, set achievable and fun goals for your community to make them feel like they're part of something. We all, like, one of our basic needs is belonging, right? Like, we want to feel like we belong somewhere. And you have an opportunity as an organization and as a leader within an organization to create community, right? You have a service or a service and a mission, and your goal, regardless of what your position is within the organization, is to build community, right? And the way to do that, and one of the easiest way to do that, is to have a goal, let's achieve something. And this could be everything from like, let's clean up a park, or let's, of course, in a safe way, in bringing people together, whether it's virtually or at an outdoor event. Having a goal, like, how do we get 100 people registered, right? Like, how do we get 100 people to attend this and that? And you do that as a community. And of course, it's a lot of work, because I plan these events, and it's definitely, we're still on the learning curve with regard to digital, and it's really difficult to get people's attention. But it's always fun to have a goal, right? To reach as a community. So I think if you can set an achievable, fun goal, and this could even be within your staff, right? Like, you can start with your team and publicize it, right? That is one way in which you can re-engage audiences, and also test out, what is connecting with community now. Which leads me to my next slide, which I think is, this is one way. I actually love this because it made me cry the first time I saw it. I don't think I mentioned this, but I moved to the Central Valley from San Jose, which is like totally two different worlds, it feels like sometimes. And so I follow hashtag Modesto, which is the city I live in. And I came across this message that said Modesto Children's Museum. And then I'm like, oh, I didn't know we were going to have a children's museum. And so now this team is actually barely, like, they just rented the space for there to be a children's museum in Modesto, because we don't have one. And so they made it so exciting, it made me cry that they actually now have a space. And here's the thing, you all are doing amazing work every day, and some of it may not seem picture worthy. Like, renting a building may not seem picture worthy, but maybe for your target audience, in this case, I'm their target audience. I'm a new mom, I have a child under 3, and it's something that really connected with me. And so I started to follow them. I almost gave them money. I think I got distracted and ended up not doing that. But you don't always have to have something super, happy, engaging, interesting, to make it interesting. Okay, so I think this is one perfect example of that. And I like this Mark Twain quote: the best way to cheer yourself up is to try to cheer someone else up. So thinking about your audiences, I think a lot of us could use some cheering up, right? And, like I mentioned before, it could be a very balanced message. And when in doubt, if you can click on the next one, Susie, I'm sorry, the next one after that, and then we'll go back to that one. When in doubt, let your audience decide, okay? Don't be afraid to get feedback, because right now you are in exploration mode, whether you're reaching a new audience in Arturo's case, or you're reaching the same audience, Leah, or new audiences. Let your audience decide. They will let you know whether or not they connect with your content. And this is why you have to track a lot of it. Okay. And especially right now, post-COVID, nobody knows, like there's no book that says, these are the 10, best ways to do this, or proven, what do they call them? The best practices. Like that's not a thing that exists right now. Like I think even, or like we're too early in the game, right? What might work for your organization might not work for another organization. But what has been proven is that if you listen to your audience, you're going to have better messaging over and over and over again. Next practices. Yes, exactly. That's a good one. I'm going to adopt it. Okay, if you could go back to the next one. To that one. So they will need to hear from you from several channels. So whatever message you have now drafted, they need to hear it from several channels, because audiences today, they're being, like I said, they're being, I need to think of a better word, because bombarded just like sounds terrible, but they are getting so many messages from different ways. So you need to be able to pick at least 2 or 3 of these channels for them to be able to really receive it and pay attention, right? So, Instagram and Facebook, text messaging, if your organization has that capability, snail mail is kind of expensive, but it might be worth it if you have it in actual campaign. I know that we had a lot of success with many campaigns that we did with snail mail. But it has to be targeted. Like, don't just send it to a zip code. Unless that whole entire community is your target demographic, you definitely have to be intentional about those dollars. And then an email, a very underrated channel is email. You want to be able to have a strong email list that delivers the message. And then also, even after, if you have a virtual event, you want to be able to give people access to it after. That is also becoming, very common. So they need to hear from you from several channels, and ideally within a short period of time. And this is basically a campaign. Okay. Any questions, concerns, or anything that I didn't cover that you were hoping I would cover? This might be a great time. Yeah, Arturo. Susie? Yes. Yeah.
I do have a question. So let's say we use, out of just even what you're showing here, the 5, we use 2 regularly, emails on our list to use more. And snail mail, we have good results with some of our clientele liking that preferred method of communication. And they all receive different, when you look at the analytics, there's a lot of different reach going on. Should that matter? Should they be compared to each other? Like, for instance, our Facebook maybe has not as many reactions to the content, but there's a lot of reach. And then there's a lot of action taken from there. Where Instagram, a lot of people like our photos more so than on Facebook, but it's hard to see the reach or the message.
Yeah.
So, is there how do you?
So you want to look at conversions. Like, where are people deciding to register? What is your services? I imagine it's like a variety of them. Like you can register, you can, okay. You can apply. So you want to look at conversions. Where are you converting people the most? And you know, and how much it's costing you to convert them in time and ads if you're buying them. So you want to have the lead, you want it to be cheap to convert people. So if you, for example, you are doing a Facebook campaign and you're paying for ads, or you're spending a lot of time drafting the message, and you add all of that up, and figure out, actually it's cheaper to invest our time in Facebook than snail mail, right, for that audience. So you basically want to do a comparison for that particular audience to be reached via each one of these channels. So you might actually end up, you know, deciding snail mail is the best way for us to reach this community that we want to reach, right? There may be a hard to reach community that will only accept snail mail. I don't know, I'm thinking about like maybe senior citizens or people who don't have access to internet in rural communities, or, you know, like there's these parts, there's this like specific pockets of community that might not be reached via social. Yeah, you want to look at conversions. Yeah. Yeah, you want to track it for sure. I forgot what I was going to say, but yeah, I think just tracking is going to be the best way to figure out what is going to be the best channels to use. You know, and you want it to be not a lot of effort. Most of the time though, you're going to need to use at least 2. You know, you would do, and you want to have similar messaging. You can also do tests, like when you do an Instagram post with one particular call to action, and then you do a second one that is similar but has a different call to action or a different wording. You want to be able to compare how many people, whether it's clicked or saved or engaged with it, right? And that's the only way you're like, that's what I mean by what I mentioned earlier. Let your audience decide. That way you can also bring this data back to your team, and you can share with them like, hey, we've seen that our audiences responds better to this. So that, you know, as then you can start organizational best practices for what your communication strategy is going to be. Because there's no such thing as like one size fits all for communications, for sure. Okay. Any other questions or thoughts about this? Susie, was there anything that you were hoping I would cover? Yes, Susie.
Oh, just a question. Here, I'll stop sharing too. Just a question that came up as, you know, hearing all these great suggestions and strategies, was thinking about just the level of staff. So say you're charged with communications and marketing, but also a lot of other things, running programs or other aspects of the work, and trying to achieve some of these goals strategically for the organization. And, you know, you spoke a lot about engaging your coworkers, your team within the organization as support. Could you just talk about some ways to bring other people into this effort when, let's face it, you know, we are stretched really thin between home and work and just kind of meeting the increased need? Can you offer any ideas of really like how to make this everybody in kind of effort?
Yeah, I think giving people specific tasks really helps. Like telling people, hey, you're going to be at this event. Do you mind sending me 10 pictures? Right? And so I wouldn't suggest like start giving everybody access to your social media or telling everybody to start writing an article for you. But I would say like giving very specific instruction, like, can you get me, can you think of 3 people that I can interview, 3 really great clients that I can interview? And can you, send an email, or even I've gotten to the point where I will draft the email and then be like, can you copy and paste this to this person, right? Like, and so I think it's important to give people very specific asks and very specific deadlines, and you'll start to see who on your in your organization wants to help disseminate the message and help with this campaign. I think also giving them praise and giving them credit for what they did is important. As they're becoming a part of the communications like team, is important, and hearing their feedback, right? Because they're probably hearing feedback that might not get back to you, but also hearing what they think about like the campaign and how it should be delivered. But I would just say like give them very specific instructions, especially those that are out in the field. Can you take 10 pictures? And always ask for 10 because you're gonna get one good one. Leah's like, yep. Maybe you'll get a good one. Yeah. You can give them instruction like this is we're doing this type of campaign, we're doing a gratitude campaign, or we're doing highlighting some staff stories. Can we use can I interview you and give or can you email me back the answers to these questions? So I think just giving very specific, and you'll see there's some tasks that might take 10 minutes, 20 minutes, or some that can just be done as they're doing their own work. I know for some of the people that I as we were doing updating their staff bios, some folks were really nerve-wracked about taking their own picture. Right. And so it's just like coaching them through it. But once you get them to do it, you're going to get some really great content. So I think it's worth it. Right. I would even venture to say that if you're on the management team, as you're hiring new people, marketing communication should be on everyone's like job description. Like even if it's like 3% or 2%, like there needs to be a part of everyone's job at an organization. Because like I said, you can have a really great service, but if you don't market it well, it's going to be very difficult, right? And the organization also has to be committed to the marketing piece, especially now that everything's going digital. Yeah. Does that help, Susie?
Yes.
Okay. And also when in doubt, hire it out. If you have the budget, spend the money. Like it's totally worth it. If you don't have a really great video and you feel like your organization needs really great video and you have the budget for it, it's going to be worth it. Right? Like, I think if you have those really great pictures, like it's worth it. Just make the investment.
I'll do a little plug for our community foundation. We have small organizational development grants that can sometimes help organizations address communications challenges, or maybe there's not really a plan in place, but there's a need for some outside expertise to come in. And so whether it's now or in the future, that may be something organizations can consider, is that type of grant support for that. Maybe it's capturing interviews or just strategizing with the organization around types of communications pieces they might need.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Great. Any other questions? So we have a couple more resources for you. One of them being a communications clinic happening next week. We are going to be So I'm going to be online and you can just drop in if you want to just ask your questions. There's going to be also, so that's one resource. Then the second resource is that you can actually schedule one-on-ones with me if you wanted to just to have a conversation about, you know, your communications or anything specific you want to talk through as well. You can do that and you can reach out to me. I'll put my, is that what we were doing, Susie? Just directly with me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll put my email address in the chat and that way we can connect and you can just send me your availability. You don't need to do any like pre-work or homework. We can just, you know, have that conversation. Yeah, so my schedule's pretty flexible as well, so we can work something out. So that's another resource. And then you are going to be receiving access to a toolkit. And once you see the toolkit, you might find that you have questions about it or you need help with support in just filling it out, or, you know, we can do it together as well. And so you'll have access to that toolkit. So there's like 3 resources that you have, and you'll have access to the recordings as well. But I hope that you will make use of that. I think, you know, everything's changing. And so I hope that you count on me to be on your communications team and supporting you in that process. Okay. But yeah, thank you so much. And thank you, Susie, for making the space for me to be able to share this information and meet the wonderful grantees and community that you have.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been taking a lot of notes here and really appreciating the ways you were really able to break down how we can approach this moment, right? And how it can help us prepare for this reopening process.
Yeah,
So thank
yeah.
you.
Thank you.
And thanks to Leah and Arturo for participating. And if you have any questions about the ongoing resources, you can reach out to me as well.
Thank you. This was very informative and very inspirational too, to